Okay, before we take our quiz, I'd like to review at least the Hume material to make sure you understand. Remember that for Hume, there is no chalk. Okay. All right. For Hume, all knowledge or all ideas are of one of two types. Okay? And what are those? Right. Matters of fact and relations of ideas. And as an empiricist, of course, until we have an a posteriori impression, a sensory stimulus, the mind, as Locke says, is blank. However, once we do have the benefit of some sensory input, the mind does possess the potential to reflect upon those ideas and to demonstrate relations between them, hence the relation of ideas. Okay. Now, the guiding question for Hume, as for most of the modern thinkers, is what can we know about the world? And according to Hume, all matters of fact, anything which I assert of the world, ultimately is dependent upon the one single principle of cause and effect. Certainly, one of the laws of nature which we assert is that every event has a cause, so that when some event transpires, we search for its cause. And even if we can't find it, we still believe that one exists and can be discovered. But even the mere existence of things in themselves is dependent upon the idea of cause and effect. Because if I have a sensory perception of an object, like the chair, I know that something must have caused it to exist. Something caused it to be in this room. Okay? And so, if our presumed knowledge of the world is based on the principle of cause and effect, then unless I can justify or show that that principle is legitimate of the world, then I cannot claim to have any knowledge of the world. So his question is, where does this principle come from? And since there are only two fountains or origins of knowledge, the perception of matters of fact or the relation between the ideas given to me by sensory perception, the principle of cause and effect must arise from one of these. So Hume asks you to consider any causal relationship that we assert. And again, his favored example is transfer of motion between two billiard balls. Okay? When we observe ball A roll into ball B, and ball B then is set in motion, we make the judgment that the motion of A is the cause of the motion of B. So let's ask, can that judgment be based on my perception? Can it be a posteriori? And of course his answer is no, because if we attend very carefully to what is actually contained in that sensory perception, all we actually perceive is A rolling up to B, which is one event, and then B beginning to roll, which is a second event. We do not have a perception of the inner necessity that when the one happens, the second must happen. Do you understand that? You see one event followed by a second event. And when we experience the constant correlation of those two events, in other words, when every single time I roll A into B, B begins to roll, I make the judgment that A is the cause of B. And so the principle that we employ to make this judgment is actually nothing but habit or custom. We get habituated to expect that the way things have happened before will happen again, that the future will resemble the past. But there is no perception of a necessary relationship between these two events. Yes?
Is it possible to give a more personal example as opposed to like a billiard balls?
Sure. That when you are hungry and you eat something and the hunger is assuaged, you assume that the eating of the food was the cause of the disappearance of the hunger. Okay? But for all we know, there may be no actual relationship between those two events, at least not based on what we perceive. It is only because the one event is proximate to the second event in space and time, because they happen at the same time, which is what he means by a constant conjunction or a constant correlation, that it is customary for us to call the first event an antecedent and the second event a consequent, a cause and an effect. But consider, for example, the relationship between two events wherein the supposed cause and its effect are separated in time. Okay? Like if you see somebody hit a baseball from a distance, you see the bat strike the ball a few seconds before you hear the crack. because light travels faster than sound. And if the disparity of speed between light and sound were even greater, we would never make the connection. We would see the bat hit the ball, and then sometime later we would hear a sound and suppose that something else must have caused it. Okay? So Hume says, consider, for example, Adam in the Garden of Eden, okay, according to the story of creation. He would have no idea until he actually experiences that eating satisfies his hunger, that fruit is the proper nourishment for the body, or that water would suffocate him. These things can only be learned by experience, but experience still does not show us the necessary inner connection between these two events. Hume calls that the mysteries of nature. Nature does not divulge her inner secrets. Okay? And as I'm fond of saying, it's not like some metaphorical flag pops up between these two events that has the word cause written on it. Okay? So we can't learn the principle of cause and effect based on perception or a posteriori. Therefore, the only other possibility is that we know it a priori, or simply on the basis of reasoning. Okay? Now, while it is true, of course, that if I have the perception of a triangle, like Euclid or Pythagoras does, I can analyze the triangle and demonstrate that certain relations exist between its various parts. Like the longest side will always be opposite the largest angle. Okay? Or once I know through experience the meaning of the word bachelor, if you tell me that your next door neighbor is a bachelor and I believe you, I do not need to go look in his window to see if he is a man. I know that he is a man simply by relating the idea of bachelor to man and unmarried. Okay? So the question is, can I achieve the knowledge of cause and effect in the same way? Just by reflecting on what is contained in the idea of something. So imagine that you were new to this world, and I were to hand you a billiard ball and ask you to analyze it. Certainly, if you were, clever enough, you could perhaps tell me how to calculate the volume of the ball or the trajectory that a ball may take. But just by an analysis or thinking about the ball, you would never be able to know that if I were to drop it on my foot, it would cause pain. Or that if I rolled it into a similar ball, it would cause the second ball to move. Because those activities are not contained in the concept of the ball. If I look at a triangle, I know that it has three sides because I can count them. But if you hand me a piece of bread and I've never before seen such a thing, I can think about it for as long as I want, and I would never be able to determine that it could nourish my body. That is learned only on the basis of continued experience, which is why Hume says that we only learn certain things after repeated exposure that we could never learn on the basis of only one exposure. Okay? If a certain food makes me ill the first time I eat it, I may make the judgment that the food was the cause of the illness. But I may be completely mistaken about that. Just because one event follows another event doesn't mean that the first event was the cause of the second event. Something else may have made me sick. Okay? And so if this so-called principle of cause and effect, which we ascribe to the universe as a universal necessary law, cannot be established either on the basis of perception, a posteriori, nor on the basis of reflection, a priori, then the principle is completely unjustified. And so when I say that one event is the cause of another event, all I am really saying is that every time the one event happens, the second event follows. But not that there is a necessary connection between them. For all I know, the next time I throw the chalk up into the air, it may stay up there. Now, of course, I don't think that is likely to happen because I've done it thousands of times, and every single time it's come back down. And with each exposure to that constant correlation, my expectation that it will happen again is strengthened. Okay? But what the question is whether or not I can know that the principle of cause and effect is actually a property belonging to nature, as opposed to simply being a subjective habit of mind. Thus, Hume says that when I say that one thing is the cause of another, I have mistaken a subjective habit of the human mind for an objective rule belonging to nature. Okay? Now, we'd have to understand this problem to understand what Kant is up to in the Prolegomena, which is our next reading. All right? Okay.